So no specific gender pronoun. POI, just unmute. Please be considerate about it. And yep, give me some minute to set up my timer. Okay, we'll start my speech in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. In the midst of information, there's a lot of like misinformation that creates a negative backlashes towards what the society and also like the government in general that hampers the government policy when it comes towards betterment. For example, in COVID, for example, right? Or maybe like how easy it is to make like campaign against each other candidate when it comes towards presidential election. For example, in US, you have, for example, Trump against Biden, or maybe, for example, Clinton versus Trump, where indeed all of the discussion relies on a lot of like the campaign, and it depends on the misinformation that affects that particular voter to whether or not that decision when it comes towards voting is going to be all right, right? Or even like how easy to manipulate the information and whatnot that is going to create a detrimental action. For example, in terms of COVID, you're going to hamper the policy in terms of COVID handling, or for example, in terms of voting, you're going to vote someone that is not going to be the right thing, right? What OG wanted in this debate is very simple. Two things. Number one, news should be consumed by society regarding what for example, regarding what minority deems important, or maybe like, for example, that might conflict it towards what majority view, because exactly this is going to lead towards society putting a big burden towards the representative to block such, to stop any kind of, or even like having a social discourses, because you don't know what is the parameter of having misinformation, right? Because that's where we think that there is a tendency for the government to have their own way being represented. For example, government idea of manipulation in terms of the information in of itself, right? We think that in any case of it is not going to be the right thing. That's where we say that our argument is going to be very simple. There's two arguments. Number one, I'm going to prove to you why news can always be okay, even if it is at the expense of being misinformed. Or second, my argument is that why it is worse under the opposition and comparison within. Look, my first argument. Look, news triggers you to ponder what should be consumed or what not. In US, for example, the consensus proved that due to how easy Fox News, for example, bringing all of their right-wing propaganda, even if it has the expanse of capital, for example, or even Joe Rogan can easily manifest his view, which trigger people to be rational. We still think that's fine because exactly, notice why we say that the benefit is still worth it. Because number one, we think that in terms of, for example, censorship, notice not only you're going to disengage the society from having a societal discourse about it, or even having in terms of awareness, but not only that, you're not going to get this type of benefit. For example, you're going to lack of rising discussion, which involve people agency to speak up and discuss what's wrong and what's not. Notice that not only this trigger those who involve to speak up, but you're going to involve community that's going to be very exclusive under our side. Because notice that how prominent government it is when it comes towards censorship in terms of idea that is going to hamper their government stability, for example. That's where we say that it is not okay under the opposition. But second of all, we think that the rising of counter narrative is also prominent under our side, because notice, for example, in terms of Fox News or maybe like Sinclair News, for example, right? We think that the idea of counter narrative is going to exist under our world far better, because, for example, you have an incentive to prove what is the right information. Then, for example, you have actors such as Trevor Noah or maybe like John Oliver to attack their view, bringing what could be wrong and whatnot later on. We think that this is where the incentive is going to be okay. We think that the benefit is going to be okay, because exactly we still have actor that is going to fight under our side and prove what is the right consensus upon such information, or whether or not the internalization of the process that is being manifested in terms of that particular misinformation is going to be lacking, right? Because there's a lack of data, for example, or maybe like, for example, logical loophole, for example, right? But even if that's still not the case, we think that notice how local news or even grassroots journalists will easily initiate more independent news outlet. For example, maybe like HBO didn't want to do this. We still think that there is going to be grassroots journalists will easily initiate more independent news outlet. For example, WIUI in Indonesia or even Jakarta Post, for example, they have the incentive doing this, because, for example, because how being misinformed can affect their well-being. For example, in terms of news media and Twitter, they wanted to tackle upon the COVID-related problem. For example, like all of the bad news and all of the misinformation regarding that if you're going to get vaccinated, you're going to be in a bad state, right? That's where we think that the news media are going to fight for us, for example, to deliver the idea that's what's right and what's wrong. But even if that's not the case, we still think that the trade-off is basically fine, because notice upon number one, the benefit is very clear because you know which one is good and which one is not. We still think that this is a better process of mechanizing upon how you're going to create a filter towards your own self, because likewise we say it is probable because most likely we engage towards the societal discourse and also like in terms of their media consumption and whatnot. But even if that's not, we still think that it's going to lead to more better internalization of what does reality constitute then. For example, you know what's wrong and what's not, but at the very least you know the quality of the information is not going to be very okay, and you're going to have a tendency to doubt upon that information, but you're going to research upon that. But second argument, why it is going to be very worse under the opposition, you notice that opposition relies on government benevolent actor that might be questionable because of three things. Number one, we still think that all of the actor under the government depends on their state of censorship are going to depend on whether or not it hurts their political stability, whether or not they're going to be reacted, or maybe, for example, information that is going to create a tipping point for the opposition party to, for example, getting reelected and whatnot. We still think that's not okay because that's not benevolent in any way possible. But before that, CO, do you have any?
Why is discourse only contingent to there being bad news? Couldn't discourse also come from credible and good news, which leads you to also think?
Notice that that's not a fair stances, because we think that in terms of goodness, for example, in COVID and whatnot, we still think that's going to be okay. For example, getting that type of trait of, for example, we're going to all of the maybe like segmented of people are going to be misinformed, but at the very least, we have the chances to raise that awareness far more natural rather than taking the information for granted. But at the very least, we still think that there's going to be a trade-off under your side that is going to be very bad, because notice that the actor, in terms of doing their censorship, it depends or not whether or not the actor are going to hurt their stigma in society, or depends on things that affect their colleges or maybe like correlated party. Look, we say in any case, this is not what you wanted to see in terms of government or even like a society in terms of being a citizen in a particular country. Because notice how this is more prevalent under the opposition, because not only the censorship based on what government deem as being okay or not, but take their best case at the very least. Notice that number one, they're going to raising a little to non-awareness because they're going to take the information for granted coming from the government. But second of all, we think that there is going to create a lack of agency to choose due to information being hegemonious. For example, right wing that is going to be propelled by St. Clair News that is going to be affected towards the whole the US. We still think that's going to be more prevalent under the opposition. That's why we're proud to propose. Thank you.
Thank you for that speech. To open the case of opening opposition, leader of opposition, here. Wait, ini harus nyalain kamera kah? No, Kak. Okay. Bentar. Just a minute. I'll change my connection sebentar. Sorry. Okay, I'm back. I think I'll just turn on my camera. Sebentar. Wait, okay. All right, POI through chat box. Starting my speech in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Where do we draw the line between freedom of speech and discrimination? Where do we notice a prominent or political tyrannical government and a stable governance? We think that these two frameworks should be the basis of this debate. We think that the main usage of information, especially in mass media, is to make sure that people are able to critical enough to make well-informed decisions. And we believe that this is the main responsibility of government, to create stability and make sure people are well educated to do so. The methods of state censorship that opening opposition support are fourfold, right? First of all, obviously, as state, we do not declare anything that's against the government as fake news, right? We do not declare the news of Joe Biden pulling out of Afghanistan as irresponsible as fake news, for example. We don't suddenly label that any mismanagement that Jokowi do to COVID-19 as a fake news to begin with, right? But we do as a state want to provide data to combat this in case this is actually wrong, for example. So this is not going to be as tyrannical or even not as credible as the Prime Minister concerned to begin with, right? But secondly, we do want to not only shut down the website altogether, but we do also want to create warning, for example, to certain medias that probably propagates all of these things, for example. But secondly, we also want to shut down certain websites, for example, that creates a lot of fake news about Sinovac vaccine or whatever it is, and probably boycott them or even take this to criminal justice system or court if this is necessary to begin with, right? Three arguments in this debate. First of all, in regards to urgency, why state censorship is extremely crucial to combat misinformation or fake news. Two reasons. First of all, because there is a very heavy currents of misinformation that happens in the status quo. For example, currently it is very rampant. Even when you open the internet, there is a lot, even thousands of toxic fake news as to why Sinovac vaccine is actually creating deterioration in your lungs, for example, or how AstraZeneca is containing 5G chip from China, for example, right? All these hoaxes have become super integrated, super internalized in the lives of the people, even through WhatsApp group, for example, and it's become very easy to proliferate to begin with. But second of all, why this is also very urgent for us to create all of this sort of state censorship to begin with, because now it even becomes more serious to the point that it actually takes lots of livelihoods to begin with, right? Back then, fake news were turned into memes, for example, or funny jokes for us to laugh at and how dumb it actually was, right? The fake news about 5G from China causing corona used to be memes, for example. But right now, exactly because it has been so internalized, this fake news becomes super serious because it manifests into a lot of Indonesians denying Chinese products like steel, for example, and making a lot of production factories become on hold, for example, or even the ongoing tension between China and Indonesia also makes it unable for them to have a very steady trading of vaccines to begin with, right? This also happens with a lot of people denying vaccination despite given the opportunity from the government to do so, right? In conclusion, the fake news have become super serious. It is not as simple as what the government bench actually wants you to believe, that this is something that Trevor Noah can simply deny to begin with. Like, this is something that even Jakarta Post can deny to begin with, because this is the truth, right? This is the livelihoods of people that does not read those types of news and only rely on government, for example. Meanwhile, the government are also currently incompetent and whatnot, right? But second argument, why state censorship is the most effective way to combat misinformation or fake news to begin with, right? Four reasons. First of all, we think that this is still the moral responsibility of government, because in principle, they've brought the mandate of the people. So it's also be their responsibility to make sure that their people are able to create well-informed decision. But secondly, in the best or ideal case, we believe that state has still the possibility to operate on good faith. They're not as tyrannical as the Prime Minister wants you to believe. We still have faith in good governments in the most ideal case, because they brought the mandate of the people. They want what's best for the people, exactly because what's best for the people is what's best for them to begin with, right? Even if to some extent they are pragmatic, they still have undeniable interests, like wanting to be re-elected, for example. That's why they make sure they won't create a bad governance or even tyrannical or create mismanagement in fake news to censor everything altogether, just like how exactly Prime Minister wants you to believe, just like what happens in George Orwell 1984 novel to begin with, right? No, we don't think that this is going to be that extreme as to create a police thoughts or whatever it is to begin with, right? But thirdly, the comparison of grassroots censorship, because they believe so much in the idea of grassroots censorship, like Nuis Media or Jakarta Post or Trevor Noah, for example, right? We do agree with OG that to some extent, people on grassroots level are already critical enough, at least some of them, to make a call out account or even small medias to clarify the truth and prevent misinformation. For example, like what happens in my areas, for example, there is this group called as Jateng 2021 Anti-Corona, which is a small media group that is orchestrated by a bunch of locals in Semarang to deny the misinformation of vaccination and urge people to be critical for information in regards to corona, right? But the comparison of these methods of censorship is that why grassroots censorship becomes so not effective, exactly because it becomes easier to deny from the opposition to begin, right? It becomes he said, she said to begin, right? At best, it only makes people even more confused as to what kind of information that they want. But at worst, it makes people even more denial and resort to fake news due to their limited span of attention, for example, right? This is exactly why this is the exclusivity of urgency as to why we need the state to do so, because in comparison, it gives more urgency and credibility when it comes from Menteri Kesehatan, for example, right? It becomes easier to clarify because we have more comprehensive data to combat fake news in regards to Sinovac vaccine or whatever it is to begin with, right? But last argument, right, in regards to trade-off, right, because this is the thing that government bench, I'm pretty sure closing government will also be scared about all of this thing, right? What happens if the state censorship is becoming exploited to begin with, to alter state's interest, for example? But we think that this is still okay to begin, right? This is the engagement to worst case. We do believe that the possible fake news about Delta variant of COVID actually emerging to Indonesia because Jokowi accept a bunch of foreign workers from India might be true, right? This possible fake news might be true, for example, right? It might be true that a lot of epicentrum that exists right now in Indonesia is exactly because that one exact event where he decided to accept these workers to begin with, right? But under our side of the house, even if to some extent we allow state to deny this fact, we allow them to declare this as a fake news, this is still an acceptable trade-off to begin, right? Because the benefit are fourfold: stability, security, greater good, and the fact that state can focus on repairing this already fucked up mistake to begin with, right? And make people go vaccination, providing more vaccines more than ever to solve these problems that already happened, right? The air, the waters that is being spilled to begin with, the milk that has already been spilled to begin with. But comparatively, under their side of the house, when they are revealing this information through whatever grassroots censorship that they actually want to reveal this fact by social justice warriors, for example, what will most likely happen on their side of the house is that they will perpetuate even bigger retaliation. They will create even and invite bigger hostility and chaos and even more violent demonstration, just like what happened in Depok around a month ago, and create another epicentrum to begin with, right? Create more instability and jeopardize a lot of businesses, for example, that becomes the victims of arson or vandalism, for example, making it even harder for reparation to exist, making people even suffer even more, even in the name of truth to begin, right? In conclusion, even if what they are so scared about is that this news is going to be an outlet for the government, for example, to make sure that they prioritize stability and security more than the truth in itself, this is an acceptable trade-off that opening opposition are willing to take, because the harm under their side of the house is going to be bigger if they want to be idealists and only want to focus on the truth. We're very, very flat to oppose.
Thank you for that speech. To continue the case of opening government, Deputy Prime Minister, here.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, I couldn't turn on the camera as well because of my connection. My POI preference will be just unmute yourself. If my speech is become choppy, you can also interrupt my speech as well by unmuting yourself, because I wouldn't see the chat box. And I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Let's make it.
Basically, misinformation will be happen on the broadcast, right? But anyway, let's see why misinformation happened. It is because people make a news that against the real situation that happening at the moment. Because nowadays it is very easy to make a news, or even you post on something on social media or even blog, and people will label you as a credible person and something like that, right? But what kind of news that actually most likely to be labeled as a fake news that people want to believe? There are the government or etc. We believe that even if those kind of fake news is being widespread in the society, we believe that there will be check and balance coming from society in the end of the day, because it is actually what they need. They will seeking for further information, since they are very needed in the end of the day, or even they can question people that actually surround them, for example, or people that actually even receive the vaccination or the aid before, right? We believe how the media works is not suddenly media when the media spread a certain information, it's make all the people have behave according to the media, because the function of the media is progressive right now. Maybe back then in 90s, then people use the media as their hypodermic needle, that actually they will believe what the all media exposed to them, and they will behave according to the media. But right now they will receive this kind of information as a form of consideration. What should they behave? And actually, human is also being progressive, right? What they do is not basically all from the media, but how your family or even your friends influence you as well. So, for example, like case, oh, the certain vaccine brings you harm, so don't get this kind of vaccine. Instead, you have to get this. Yes, you do agree if harm could be happen. For example, if you get the shot of the vaccination, but you make it as a consideration since you need the vaccination, so you can access anything. For example, you want to go to the mall or you have to get a certain education. So even if you get harm, it will be okay for you anyway, right? And move in the second cases, which is what's the ideology, since everyone has their own perspective, but somehow there's a party that want to take this perspective down, which is the government. For example, they believe in the conspiracy, saying that COVID is from global elites and etc. But the government saying no, it is wrong because we believe it's still okay anyway, since everyone has their freedom to believe, right? But if it is hamper other, it's not the news itself, since the news or information, again, is something that people need to make any comparison or something that they want to value. So if it is hampering, what can government do is, what is that? Punishing the action that coming from the certain person to begin with. For example, they not following the health protocol and etc. Yes, we agree that they should be punished because of their action. Because we believe the government trying to do the censorship, what will happen is that they are trying to make the news, even the underground movement, for example. It is hard for us as a government to know what's the discourse that rising in our society, because we believe we agree as OO, we as government, we want to be responsible for our society, but the only way to do this is that we want to make them freedom to access all the information, so we can know what is actually the value, the information that they value, for example, or their way of thinking, for example, since they actually the one that actually write the news to begin with, right? So what happened in the opposition side of the house is that when the government make the censorship, we believe it is very biased to begin with, right? Because it is based on government. Moreover, when it comes to government, there will be interest coming from the government. We have to portray three interests coming from the government to begin with. The first is the political point of view. Since they want to make their political spectrum bigger, for example, in US conservative people, you want to create all this kind of conservative, even being more widespread in the media, for example, right? So what will you do is neglecting all political spectrum that not in line with your current government, for example. You will blame all the progressive people as the one who want to spread the fake news. All the news coming from the progressive people is the fake, and in the end of the day, right? Because you want to make yourself even bigger, and so you can gather your voters to begin with, right? And the second will be the government want to be portrayed as a good leader to begin with, right? So if there's a news portraying about the government doing the evil things, for example, to do the corruption, for example, or even they doing a project that they themselves couldn't handle that to begin with, for example, they will try to hide it in the end of the day, right? So if there's people that actually want to writing it on the media, they will label it as a fake news to begin with, right? So it is very hampering in the opposition side. Lastly, about the government is that their purpose is want to appeal the majority to begin with, because they are trying to cater out the majority needs, since their interest is that they want to get the vote coming from the majority. So they would say all the things that not appealing for majority, or even the exposing that actually helping or supporting the minority is the fake news to begin with. We as society, we want to have this kind of check and balance coming from the media that actually capturing all of our point of view of the political, or even our identity as a majority or a minority. We don't want to have government has full control over the media, because what is about what should society believe, since we don't want to live in authoritarian state that actually limiting our source of information. So that's why we want to propose.
Thank you so much for that speech. To close the case of the opening bench, Deputy Leader of Opposition, here.
Yes, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
You are
Okay, thank you. POI to the chat. 1 second, let me fix my paper and timer. Sebenarnya pengen sih Kia, cuman kayak ya udahlah. kamar mandi ntar aja. POI, please to the chat. Yeah, I'm going to prioritize one that comes from closing government. So if closing government has any POI, please just POI to the chat, and I'm going to accept it later. Starting my speech in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 4 problems that comes with the case of opening government, right? Number 1, I don't think that opening government can win this debate by taking discourse as a benefit in and not itself, for example, right? Because we don't think that's the case. The discourse that you need in status quo has to lead to a certain output that you want in the end of the day, for example, right? It's needed to protect and lead policy making needed by people for government, for example. At this way, Mutiara's context becomes very important, right? Because when misinformation becomes so hard and unable to be protected, for example, that's why government need to step in, and we need to protect people from the discourse that is so bad that happens in status quo to begin with, right? But number 2, notice government's benefit is very contingent to people being able to be aware and take into account changes and like which one is right or wrong. For example, Mutiara contextualized to you already in this debate that most of the time people have like limited attention span and whatnot. For example, most likely exactly because current status quo, the social media is like have too much information, because we go to Instagram, Twitter, and whatnot. You won't have that much agency, and you won't have that much time to see whether or not it can fly to begin with. If government cannot prove this, their case falls. But number 3, notice Deputy Prime Minister is inconsistent, right? Because at first he stated that people who all posted on social media would see you with credibility, for example. But then they say that no, there's going to still be check and balance, for example, right? Notice that when that benefit comes to fly, for example, if check and balance exists, then not everyone can pop in because of credibility. I don't get why that's going to happen. But number 4, they're very dismissive to Mutiara's contextualization, right? Because if they put on a worst case scenario, if government is that evil, I'm going to prove to you why it's not happened on my substantive later on. 2 things in my speech. Number 1, about why state censorship is necessary to combat fake news. Second, about the effectivity, why it's better on the output level on opening a position. Right? Number 1, about like why it's necessary, why state censorship is necessary, right? Because government's case is that they want people with their own rationality and whatnot to opt into and like become neutral and everything, right? I don't think that's the case, right? Notice that no government has ever acted in a fully neutral point before, for example, right? Most government acts in a preventive way to later on being able to protect their citizens, right? I think there are 2 structural reasons for this, right? Number 1, I think that social contract does exist. They realize if they screw up their governance system and everything, most likely they're going to be they're going to like not being able to be re-elected in to begin with. But number 2, for example, right, they need their people to be safe anyway, because they're going to deal with those people later on, and they need them for like future cooperation and policy making and everything, for example, right? This engages directly to Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister's point, right? Because we agree, government are public oriented, government do have their own interests, but notice that in most of the cases, for example, government in the current status quo do have interests that align with the majority of the current society to begin with, right? For example, as to how when a government wants to have a fully work economy, that's why most of the time they put people on to do vaccines and whatnot, for example, right? Which means that most of the time they're going to put up vaccines overload, for example, which will only deteriorate if they let these kinds of misinformation fly in the end of the day, right? This kicks out opening government's urgency, because government is not that evil. They have the necessity and they have also the interest to keep their people safe, even for their own pragmatic, self-fulfilling interest to begin with, right? Kick that out to begin with, right? But number 2, I think even if, for example, government becomes like a little bit like autocratic, which sometimes government need to do that anyway, right? Because government has the right and responsibility to intervene when it comes to harm to begin with, right? Just allowing an essence of misinformation to fly hampers parts of people's life. It could kill your father, it could kill your mother, for example, if it's just because of COVID, for example, right? This is why even if Shella only frames that it becomes a consideration of people, this consideration could be deadly. And so even to the extent and the smallest level possibility of harm, government has the right and they have the responsibility to take that down before it can harm any majority of the society. I don't think that their urgency can fly to begin with, right? Before moving on to your eye closing government.
Why then in your side of the house, even when the censorship gone, these people who already believe quote unquote a vaccine is bad for you suddenly do not believe that vaccine is bad for you?
Okay, so I'm going to just rebut that on my substantive, right? Second issue about effectivity, right? on government, most of the time you're going to say that there's going to be grassroots censorship, right? That's what OG claims, probably what CG is going to champion on their speech, right? What did Kia ask? Kia asked the fact that people won't believe anyway. We understand it happens on both sides. Maybe that's the worst case scenario. But at least what we gain in opposition is when we shut this down, what happens then is we're not going to be contingent to the ability of society being able to rationalize it to themselves, right? Because notice what happens on grassroots censorship, right? Grassroots, number one, is very contingent to people's on the ground ability to fact check and whether or not they want to come and pursue those other level. But number two, grassroots kinds of check and balance never finishes the misinformation to their root because they can only complain, for example, that they can not like ban only for once, right? The comparative is this, and this answers Kia's POI, right? When government in a society, they are seen as authority, right? Because they're being seen as the one with the data, and that there is no actor in the country that's able to opt into that makes it able to opt into it. For example, that is above them in the country, for example, right? The moment when government intervenes and they opt inside, for example, it shows an actual effective clarification because it shows that from a trusted source of information, the information that's being spread around that is wrong to begin with, right? This means if you want to talk about the delta of discourse, well, discourse may exist on both sides, then the delta that happens on government, which is going to be a harm, is that the discourse has no output because on both sides, exactly the credibility from both who are like saying yes or saying no to vaccine is going to be on the same bargaining level and only on the same chip to begin with, right? But at least in opposition, for example, we give an actual credible level of urgency for people to do clarification, for example, right? Because notice when government is up into, for example, and people believe that they hold the mandate and they hold the best interest of public and heart, for example, that's exactly why most likely people are going to believe our clarification, and so the harm that's being put up by closing government cannot fly in the end of the day, right? But even in the worst case scenario for both sides, what's most important is the outcome, right? Because what happens then inside opposition, for example, is that you have efficient policy making being passed because people will cooperate with your policies when you lock down those kinds of misinformations, right? Because government has told to you that this is the main supply of information you have to believe to, for example, right? Even World Health Organization, for example, you can believe, or you can believe BPOM, for example, right? This means most likely, even if there's like a small level of people, most of the time our clarification will be gained by people on the ground. Most likely they're going to listen to what we say and follow our policy and make sure that our policy making will pass. We're going to make sure that society could be at least be safe in the longer run. I'm very proud to oppose this debate. Thank you.
Thank you for that speech. To open the case of the closing half of the debate, member of government, here.
Hi, can you hear me? Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Audible.
Okay, cool. POI through mic because I will not be saying my chat box. I'm going to prioritize cross bench. That's the trend, I guess. Anyways, I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. The biggest flaw from both opening bench is to not realize that the problem with state censorship, which is a really extreme form of censorship, is that the one who decides whether or not the news should be taken down or that account has to be simply blocked out from the social media or even the news being shut down totally is not the people, it is the government, right? And that is why the pinpoint of that is really harmful. That is why closing government is really proud to propose and this debate. Two stances and two clear clarifications that distinguish closing government from opening government. Firstly, I think opening has never explained to you how does state censorship look like. I'm going to explain, right? It's manifest into taking down informations to some extent account blocking or even taking down your account, publicly hindering you from posting anything on social media or even simply blocking that news outlet, for example, right? But secondly, what does closing government want? Simple. We also want discourses and people's ability to speak up. We will not let government to control the ability for us to give check and balances. But secondly, we're going to let news exist. That is say also sure, misinformations and whatever. We take the bullet in this debate. But lastly, what we want you to understand is that we don't combat this by like extreme form of censorship, but exactly like scientific data, an official statement by the Ministry of Health, for example, that's what closing government stands for. Two arguments I'm going to explain and proceed in my speech. Firstly, why this gives too much power towards the state. I'm going to also directly engage with opening opposition here. And secondly, I'm going to explain why state censorship by like taking down misinformation is not grassroots problem solving. I'm also going to explain parameters of parameters of news being taken down by the government. But firstly, I just want to rebut like this huge headline that was in end of Kevin's speech by him saying that oh, people is going to believe you, and that's going to like proceed into somehow better policy making. Firstly, I don't understand why people is going to believe a government that is very authoritarian. That is to say, I don't want to believe in my government who constantly hinders my ability to speak up or even giving check and balance towards the government, right? But secondly, I just also don't understand why policy making is exclusive to the side of the house. Because assuming that is the case, I think the way you make policy to exist is when you see a direct harm that exists in society, and that is exactly misinformation and fake news, right? So if like if like they want to talk about like policy making, I don't understand like why that's exclusive under the side of the house. First argument then, why this gives too much power towards the government? What you have to understand is that sometimes we have to I think all benches have to engage and ensure that sometimes news that is being taken down is also news that is not in favor of the government, right? What does this look like? It's like, for example, someone who criticizes them, so like morals or whatever, a lot of like news who directly criticize the president, for example, by not having a very good system, for example, right? So that's the problem, right? Government frames news they take down as something that is like misinformation, while it is just like a form of opposition and check and balance towards the government. For example, like the Chinese government shutting down information about Hong Kong's borders and so on and so forth, right? The problem is people's ability to speak up can only be in social media, getting it viralized, and then it going into news, and that is how like discourse happen, right? But why this is important and why this is harmful? It's exactly because the only way for people to speak up is through that social media outlet, is through that news outlet, right? Because you maintain anonymity, for example, because you still don't have to like disclose your information by like criticizing for the government. What happens in like opposition is exactly you disallow check and balances to exist, making this like a very extreme brain and utilizing it for their own good, but and hiding secrets from the people, right? But I'm going to like directly engage the opening opposition because like they have preempt this. Three responses to this. Firstly, I think opening opposition simply cannot just say that shutting down is okay because it ensures security and stability. Why is it the case? Because that contradicts their principal argument. Because opening opposition said by themselves that news media have more obligation to serve news. So that is to say, it means that they also have to like serve every news that exists. That includes also like criticism towards the government, right? But secondly, what they told you is this: oh, people is going to be even more hostile when disclosed to the news. Like for example, like demonstration is going to happen because now we realize that government is shit at handling COVID, for example. Firstly, I think hostility happens regardless because corruption of like dana ban, so people are mad, like people dying of COVID, like empty oxygen tubes, and etc. So like even the way the government handles the vaccine, people are indifferent, right? People are already hostile in the first place. So I don't understand why this is like something they should be concerned about. But thirdly, what they told you is this, right? Oh, the trade-off is this: government shutting down is better because as long as they work into as long as they solve the issue, then that is completely okay. Firstly, I don't think so because they cannot assume that by shutting down it equals completely to them solving the problem. Because sometimes I just feel like they just shut it down so that there's no people who's going to be, talking about them on social media and so on and so forth. It doesn't like equal to them then directly solving that issues. But secondly, solving issues exactly
UI.
happens when the news exists, right? When people are demonstrating, when people are asking. So like what we do is we press government to clarify, to speak of the matter, and that is why it is comparatively better outside of the house. So what is the even if? Even if people are hostile or even like going into demonstration, that is okay, right? As long as we pressure the government into giving what is the actual truth and then engage into those people who doesn't believe that Sinovac exists or simply doesn't want to understand the concept of COVID. But second argument that the state censorship taking down misinformation is not grassroots problem solving. I think that this engaged into pure misinformation. That is to say, like no facts, just keepers that people put on social media, or even journalistic just using this as a way for clout, right? What if it's alleged misinformation, and why that is okay? Two reasons why. First, two reasons why. Firstly, I think they just simply cannot like use this as a justification to shut it down because informations have already been digested, right? That is to say, even if like you're going to shut it down, I think people can still read it anyway, and there is a digestive bit in their mind. But secondly, I think this gives like unjustified like reasons because it gives illusions as if they have solved it. Why doesn't it work? Because people are still going to believe fake news anyway. Because regardless of you like shutting it down anyway, people will still believe in son of like is not halal for the etc. So it doesn't directly engage into the problem for them. Because the problem with them is that they don't believe it because they don't see like a scientific data or a fact that directly like oppose their beliefs, and that is why we say that the way for you to engage in them is not by shutting down the news, it's by giving them scientific data in the first place. But what is comparative, right? I think opening opposition cannot just like come into this debate and say, oh, we're going to shut the news hand in hand with giving data, because like the way you trigger data for, or like the government to like give official statements, it's exactly when the news inherently exists, right? So well, I don't understand why that can suddenly happen under outside of the house. The comparative is this: under outside of the house, exactly because we let misinformation still exist, we disprove them. Two reasons why: first, it won't be really harmful like what opening opposition has tried to portray, because discourses still exist in the comment section, right? That is to say, of course, there's also educated people who's going to like give check and balances that this news is simply stupid. But secondly, I think under outside of the house, we give scientific statements by Ministry of Health. So like that's comparatively much better than just shutting down like the entire website, giving even more people justification to hate the government, saying that they just simply doesn't want to engage in the problem, but they just want to take the easy version out, and that is by shutting this news and not actually giving people a socialization and so on and so forth. And that is why we think that it is so harmful, proud to be closing government.
Thank you for that speech. To continue the case of opposition, member of opposition, here.
As beforehand, I would like to mention my POI preference. You can just unmute yourself because I won't be looking at the chat box. I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. So panels, before going any further on to our arguments, I would like to discharge several points that are coming from the closing government in here. First, they stated that the only way for people to speak up is through social media and through internet, and hence by making the government work on the censorship, this will hamper this kind of notion. So the thing is that we are tackling in our debate today is that the government is going to be tackling fake news, hoaxes, and also misinformation regarding several issues in here, as in regards of this in regards of our status quo that we are living in right now, because we are living in crisis and etc. So therefore, what we are going to be tackling here is fake news and also hoaxes. So therefore, people are going to be still going to be able to speak through social media to speak up regarding several topics and etc. And the second point that we would like to discharge in here is that hostility happens regardless. By implementing just censorship by the government or by the state itself, this will create and emphasize that there is still a good side from the government, that amidst this chaos and crisis that happening, they are still working accordingly for the people. This will assert their dominance as well. This is an important factor. Why? Because not all government is bad in here. Only, for example, like the perpetrator of the corruption dana bansos, and there are some certain parties and people who are bad inside of the government, but not all of them. There are still government who are still working linear with what the intention and what the people try to achieve in the first place. For example, this will help the good government to take care of the crisis and to help mechanize and also put circumstances amidst of this crisis and to control the people and the society as well. And so we would like to go into our arguments. We can win this debate if we can prove to you 3 things in here. First, why state censorship works better on media censorship. And second, in assumption crisis is everywhere, state censorship will enhance government credibility, and this will help our society to create a better lifestyle. And 3, why the government cannot make this political. And what they should prove in our debate today is that first, why it is justified to sacrifice government's image at times of crisis like this, where our reliability to government keeps increasing. And secondly, how check and balances can still happen amidst underprivileged and educated and all people who are lacking informations and access to this information to begin with. And our urgency in here that at times where internet and informations work linear in a fast pace, information can spread easily, especially at times of crisis where people are panicking and etc. So our stance in here and goal in here is to enhance the effort on censorship and to increase the trust within the citizens to the state. And the status quo that we have right now is enough, and we would like to enhance a bit more. We have already combated misinformation in the right manner, and we have plenty of examples. In our first layer of arguments, the government can actually work better with this censorship. Government works better because they have branches and divisions of their own, for example. In terms of misinformations and hoaxes related to health and medical information, the government can easily cross-check and ban informations and facts that are false through the Kemenkes assessment with Kemenfo, for example. And all existing organizations and divisions in the government in status quo work hand in hand with the state censorship. This will help combat hoaxes more effectively than before. This will increase the effectivity of censorship with plenty of divisions. This will help censor all the detailed hoaxes, those who are actually unforeseen, even to the smallest detail. This will create a bigger effectivity and trust as the party who, for example, who clarified hoaxes are the governments themselves directly or state censorships. We need to see that the state censorship is the most reliable in status quo right now, and hence people are going to be believing. And in our second layers of arguments in here, even if the government proposal is implemented, for example, there is no just reasoning There's no just reasoning that can justify their proposal in the first place. That will worsen their proposal will worsen the state censorship and government image. For example, because why their image matter to begin with, why their image matters here as one of the stakeholders in here. The government is the most prominent figures and crucial at times of crisis. We are living in a world filled with crisis, and not just COVID-19, but also crisis that makes the government a supposedly reliable figure for the people to provide them with a lot of essential needs and contributions. This demands the government to be able to mechanize and control the society with vast and wide range of people. The government tend to use news and internet, for example, and other platforms where they can share information to citizens. And our arguments comes in here when state censorship in here is a good start for the government to gain trust from the people, as this will help create the image and emphasize that the government cares to the people. In effect, with many people are still doubting the government and tend to double check the news the government ban after it is proven that the government actually banned the fake news and provide them with a lot of beneficial information. This will help them, and this will help us even more. In comparison, we will give you a comparison here. The consumer of common media or news, for example, from WhatsApp and also Facebook, are those who don't have access to Twitter or, for example, like news websites like BBC, because they're lack of knowledge regarding this kind of thing. Hence, they don't double check their hoaxes and misinformations. For example, like old people or like underprivileged people or uneducated people. These people are more prone to hoaxes because they only consume this kind of informations blindly. This is where government needs to step in. They rely on the government because they have no other access, because they have no other media or other kinds of platform to prove whether the news that they are reading is actually true or not. The government work in here as a mass censorship. In the absence of state censorship, this will create hoaxes and misinformation will spread among these people like wildfire, because they will not be doing the check and balances because they don't have the capability and the ability to, compared to the state censorship where the government can actually ban harmful hoaxes and also provide them with beneficial information in return. In our third layer of arguments, the government cannot make this kind of notions, in the state censorship notion, as something political to begin with. Why? Because the opening have explained before, Kevin and Kamuti have explained before, that the government today have linear intention with the people, especially at times of crisis, this COVID-19 pandemic, like in Indonesia. We agree with this characterization that they brought, but we will emphasize why it is hard for the government to make this kind of notion political. Under the pressure that there is global and also international news exists to begin with, the people can see and match whether the government can actually work in their favor or not. For example, like when the government provide them with several informations or ban several informations, a lot of people can actually check whether the news that they are actually banning is actually something false to begin with. And under crisis, for example, a small spark of fire will create a big chaos in here. This is not the trade-off that the government will take to begin with. Because we have faced a lot of hostility already, so this is not something that the government will take as a trade-off. And people can also see what's actually happening in field in order to prove whether something is actually a hoax or a misinformation. So therefore, it is actually really important to note that this kind of state censorship will not be made political at times of crisis by the government. And that's all for me. I close my case. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that speech. To close the case of the government bench, government whip here.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
PI through chat. I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Do not believe in opposition when they say that government wants the majority wants. Government wants what is beneficial for them. Government wants the idea of hospital that is specifically going towards them first. Government wants the idea of vaccinated being first towards them. Government wants a lot of things, but nothing about what society wants. The majority of people don't want the idea of OOITF, for example, but they use it anyway. That proves to you that the government never wants the idea of what the majority wants. The government still uses the center anyway, government will still going to be not that kind of benevolent actors. Therefore, I do not think that giving them power, the big power to have this kind of censorship is actually a good idea, right? I'm going to engage in opening government first, and then opening opposition, and lastly, I'm going to engage on closing opposition. First of all, opening government brings two ideas. A, the idea of better discourse of society. B, government will only benefit towards them, and yeah, whatever it is, right? I think that what is the flaw of opening government is that they don't explain to you what is the manifestation of discourse of society, right? What is the manifestation of it, and what happened without this kind of censorship, and what happened with this kind of censorship, and how big the government will hold the power if they have this kind of censorship. This is why closing government's upper hand towards the opening government, because we explain those two things. But let's engage on the idea of opening opposition, right? A, they believe that moral responsibility of government is make sure that people are educated and well informed. Well, we agree. Therefore, it's actually going to be also happen now. But B, they are believing that idea of making people are not denial and also relying on fake news, right? The idea of censorship coming from state. Look, banning this particular news, not making those people stop believing in this kind of fake news. Government took down the misinformation of vaccines that brings Bluetooth or contain something dangerous. The news gone, but the manifestation of people who believe that is still going to believe that it's actually still there, right? What is the reasoning behind this? Exactly, because people with government take down this particular fake news about vaccine, for example, states think that the problems are done. They done all because the WHO, for example, say that this is actually a wrong news. They are taking down. They think that this particular problem is done by they are taking this particular news. But without the assisting of, but notice that without the idea of that the idea of people digesting and believing in it is still going to be there. Without the existing the forward news exists, it's nullified the urgency for people to call the other people who believe on the hoax that they are wrong because they think that it's quote unquote taken care of. This is the harm that is actually happened in both opposition world. They think that they are actually fixing the condition, but they don't. They just feel What is the harm then? A, people who already believe that hoax will always believe in that anyway. But B, people who believe in that hoax, even worse, even be mad because they feel like they are right. When they are being shut it down, this is also nullified the arguments coming from Muti upon the idea of create less hostility, security towards the people. Because I do not think so. People who actually believe in that vaccine brings Bluetooth to your freaking body, for example, is the one who is actually very much stubborn, for example, very much self-centered and so egoistic. What does it translate to you? Translate into the moment you are shutting down this particular news towards them and towards them, most probably they are going to be even mad and nullify you as a government, saying that you are a corrupt government and do not respect them anyway, right? But lastly, the harm is that people who are already smart enough don't feel like they have the urgency to quote unquote calling the other people who believe in hoax. Because most probably they think that it's actually already covered by the idea of censorship. What is the comparison then in our side of the house? Within the closing government bring you the comparison. The people in our side of the house will not going to be who actually believe in the kind of fake news. It's not going to be that hostile anyway because they are believing, oh, I'm not being shut down. I'm being nullified by a scientific idea, for example. The urgency to create the counter narrative is going to be even happen in our side of the house because the former fake news still going to be active. It means that it creates a trigger towards the other people to create a certain constant scientific data to actually nullify this particular idea. People who are stubborn have a better chances to believe in us because we are not actually shutting them down by quote unquote just believe not taking care of the ego and whatever it is, right? So I think that the comparative of people changing their mind is going to be more likely better out of the house because we are not creating fire towards those people who actually believe in anti-vaxxers or believe in those kind of fake news anyway. This is actually engaging to the kind of opposition based case on the idea the fake news is real fake news. Now the idea of misinformation that is actually not in favor towards government. Before continue, yes, opening opposition.
Why is your stance or mechanism about combating fake news with data exclusive?
Yeah, it's exactly exclusive because Papa already explained to you the idea of people who actually creating an urgency to create scientific data and also create a comparative and also telling those people they are wrong is exactly when the news still going to be coexisting in the status quo. Therefore, it's very much important for us to just let that misinformation or fake news just happen there, right? Exactly because it triggers more this kind of people, of scientific people or any other rational people to calling them but constantly saying that this particular news is wrong, constantly telling you the journal is wrong. We know that this is absent in opposition world, right? Because the opposition were most probably than not, the government thinks that we are actually already fixing the condition by the idea of censorship and I don't know. But even worse in your side of the house, I think that people could be more hostile such as what I explained before, right? But lastly, on the idea of government status quo is aligned with the majorities one, I do not think so. If government is not going to be aligned with the majorities one, government just want to benefit, and that I don't think that you're giving this power to censor anything misinformation that quote unquote being, being but quote unquote being standardized by them is actually better, right? Because most probably than not, they are going to misuse it anyway. Because as I said before, government is going to be going to more probably than not believe in what or to fulfill what they demand at the end of the day. But let's engage closing opposition. Closing opposition believes that it's giving trust to government does create a happy better image. I do not think so yet, like because in your thought of the heart, most probably government not look good. It creates a narrative that for government is not accommodating. It creates a narrative that the government is not respecting towards this kind of information and whatever it is. It's going to be create a skeptical towards your government at the end of the day, right? I do not think the idea of giving trust to government is going to be even acted. The comparative in our the yes, we understand that this kind of news is harmful, and we are very, very sorry. Exactly, this is us government. We need to ignite a lot of we need to mix that of a counter narrative, for example, and also rely to other actors to also create a counter narrative such as the scientific or any other movement, for example, to actually create this particular narrative towards this particular people who believe in so. So what is closing government has proved to you why our contributions matters, right? Because we don't make this kind of government to have the kind of full power to create a censorship towards something. We are creating that saying that the check and balance is the manifestation of discourse to be better inside the house because we engage to stubborn people better, which is very much the one that's very much harmful in the society. The right of we think that the hostility maybe we think that hostility demonstration happening in the both sides moment your society is actually not satisfied towards you, therefore we propose motion. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that speech. To close the debate, let's call upon the opposition whip. Here.
Okay, wait. I'm gonna set my timer. Pio, I just unmute yourself. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Several clarification to clarify the several things that come from government, right? First of all, I don't think that what OG is saying about utilize that this fake information as the political tool is something that a fair context on this debate, right? Because even it's just like both of opening said that it is something that very vague, that if we are talking about that content of the political dynamic that trying to block the information, I think something that very vague. For example, whether which one is something that really justify or not to do it, for example, right? Therefore, I think in principle, it's something that can be debated. I think it's supposed to be something that in the context that more fair, right? That is to say that we are talking about OOP's case, about it is something that it is something that already absolutely wrong. For example, such as like vaccine, for example, have containing chip, for example, such as like COVID is a myth, for example, or something that created, for example, by member of government, for example, about trying to utilize for the minority and such, for example, right? But also, look, we don't think that what CG saying, for example, that in the end that this is only that in the end of the day that people will not going to be solve this problem and so on and so forth is not right, because I think that it is already proved to you, for example, how, for example, that government reputation is heavily rely on this and so on and so forth, right? I think that what we need to clarify is that first, I think that under our side, counter narrative is not automatically disappear by the internet, because I think that this kind of the counter narrative and the grassroots narrative still going to be exist anyway, for example. But look, I think that the debate isn't about people that will be influenced by this counter narrative that happen in the grassroots itself, right? Because take a look at CG, for example. They first, for example, want to say that, for example, oh no, people are going to be mad, for example, when government trying to cut this information, for example, that people will still going the persona and the nuance of all of the thing that these people believe is still going to be left out, for example. But next, for example, they say they want to make more people to spreading more data and so on and so forth, right? This is contradictory, right? Because under their side, if those people is that conservative and cannot be changed and do not want to watch data, why, for example, that under your side you could be neutralized and mitigate these people anyway, right? Okay, mitigate people anyway, right? Because look, okay, why? But why it's going to be comparative with our opposition, right? Well, I'm going to be prove to you in my point, right? Okay, so what actually CO already explained to you? We already explained to you two things, right? First, we already mechanized how these people receive this information and why the counter narrative cannot be effective. Second, we already also talking about how, the government tool as the government as tool for government to their own benefit. But even if, for example, that it still cannot be as extension, well, we simply will going to be right on OO's case and trying to rebut everything that happened in the government, right? But first of all, okay, let's talking about what we are told to you in the mechanics of how people receive this information. I think that my member already told to you, for example, that these people is the one that who cannot doing check and balance, for example, or the one, for example, who is trying to heavily for example, that it is the one that, for example, that very effective for the check and balance, right? Why? Because, well, I think that OO already explained to you about the internalized value, right? But why this internalized is something that really that strong anyway, right? We don't think that the context is the one. We are talking about the people that able to be influenced by this counter narrative, just like Trevor Noah and any grassroots journal, just like what they say, they are saying, right? Because, well, if we are talking about them, and, well, understand that the government case is not going to be any problem, but we are talking about those people who simply unable to be teach by this kind of the counter narrative that exists. What you are talking about? We are talking about the people who has lack of exposure from the information, or the conservative people that trying to be influenced by like, you know, the information that that embodiment within their own belief, right? Because look, I think the one that most likely trying to spread by this misinformation is, well, you know, the one who get information from social media or internet, for example. That's to say that the one who's going to be easily influenced is maybe first is the conservative people, because they see, for example, that the information is trying to, like, you know, mix within their belief, for example, that vaccine is for example, is still is haram, and so on and so forth, for example, or also the one who have lack of or the one, for example, who lack of the information, for example, those in the rural area, for example, who easily believe in the conspiracy. But thirdly is also notice that how people spread the fake information. It's also by using that by using that the provocative narrative, right? Most likely, maybe they're trying to channeling the anger to trying to blame certain people. Like that's how people are trying to blame the government by telling that all of the mistake, for example, or also they do all the kind of the provocative wording, for example, in order, for example, to make people believe in that, for example, right? This kind of the people is the one that you cannot be countered by this kind of the counter narrative, just like journalists and Trevor Noah, for example, simply because all this kind of the journalists and Trevor Noah, like you want to say, is cannot using the same strategy, for example, because they don't have that strong engagement as the fake news and the spread media, for example, that are spread anyway, for example, right? But even if, for example, that the news is really will be reached to their ear, for these people ear, we think it's already kind of useless, because people are already trapped in the echo chamber anyway. For example, these people is already trying to believe it to begin with, right? That's why under our side, we want to do is simply trying to cut the information exactly in order to at least, like, you know, stop what we want is at least to stop these people becoming more conservative and becoming more colluded within this fake information, and we are trying to stop that how the other people will going to be created anyway, right? I think this is right. Right, I think this is important, because OO just telling to you that this value is internalized and so on and so forth, but never trying to more like characterize to you how these people work and why, for example, this counter narrative cannot be. Okay, but secondly, let's talking about tool of government's benefit anyway. Tools of government benefit anyway, right? I think Hafiz, my member already told to you, for example, why that it is easily for people to trying to counter that how the government doing fight information, right? First, I think it's very already we are saying that it's very already unlikely, because, well, I think that regardless of what they think about government evil intention, I think that the most important intention for government, especially in the time of the crisis and so on and so forth, is exactly to get the job done, for example. Therefore, I think that it is the main intention at all, right? But secondly, I think it is not that easy for government to keep lying, for example, right? The reason why we want to cut this information and do censorship exactly because we cannot control the source information. We are talking about the information that's spread in the media, in the internet or social media, that's spread by anonymous, and we cannot control. But we think that government is not that easily, or government institution is cannot be easily that relied, right? because, well, I think there is more institution that are going to be counterbalance and then and so on and so far. But secondly, I think that I think that government already knows how their reputation is already bad enough. Therefore, they're going to be not that stupid anyway. But even if they're trying to lie, for example, I think that many kind of the counter people, for example, is able to counter this kind of thing. So government is not that easily to lie. Very proud to oppose.